Welcome to the PolyPsych podcast. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay.
And Stephanie Moreno.
We're here with John Wilkerson, who want to talk about STEM education and homeschooling in general. So here's my first question to you. Should we push the education system more toward these STEM programs? And I ask that because STEM programs typically lead to extreme innovations. Like when you think of the technology in your pocket or the things that make your life easier, a lot of it comes from STEM. Like it comes to me, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Like liberal arts aren't necessarily going to put you on the moon. Granted, we run the government,
nor are they super lucrative.
Yeah,
unless you're like president.
Yeah. So should we push the education system more towards STEM programs?
Well, I think certainly that the current push is good. However, one of the things that I am seeing is that despite the push that's going on, the innovation is only happening among a very small group of people. And I think it's because of the way the U.S. education system is set up, where everything is kind of set up to do things in a certain way. And the people that push the envelope are the ones that kind of break out of the standards and really look to thinking about a problem differently, which is why I encourage it so much in STEM education in homeschooling so much, because a lot of times, homeschoolers, they've been looked at as people who color outside the lines for quite a while now, and I think it takes people who color outside the lines in order to innovate.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot with universities that kind of try to break out of the mold, and I've realized in history, especially in anthropology, a lot of times universities will get stuck in a certain way of doing things. So, is that the same for STEM as well? Like, are they also can they become stagnant over time?
I think absolutely they can. When I was a kid in school, STEM has just kind of really been rebranded, I guess, if you will. They're looking for a way to make teaching science, right, and things like that sexy, and they've used STEM as a way to do that. Most of us were taught a lot of what's going on in most schools right now when it comes to STEM education. We just weren't taught it in the same way that they're doing it now. When I grew up, when I was in school back in the late 70s and early 80s, computers were just starting to become the new thing. And so all schools were trying to get computers in a classroom somewhere so kids could learn how to use them and learn how to program. And now it's just moved to something different. It's a tablet or it's robots and things like that. So I think as far as the push that's going on right now, it's been there for decades. It's just kind of been used in a different light right now. And I think what needs to change with STEM education is not necessarily the amount of STEM education that's done, but how it's being done.
So how would you fix it? What policies need to change?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily any policies that need to be changed. I think it has more to do with the modern classroom. The modern classroom was designed years and years ago when we were entering the Industrial Revolution, and there needed to be standards for people who were moving into the cities so that they had basic skills to do all these manufacturing jobs. And these days, while it's great for there to be a standard, we've restricted ourselves so much to that standard that kids aren't allowed to learn freely. And I think more self-directed learning needs to happen, which happens with homeschooling, not all the time, but with a big number of homeschoolers. The children are self-directed. They get to pursue their own interests. And I think that's what needs to happen with STEM is instead of saying, okay, well, this week we're going to look at this particular subject. If there are kids who continue to stay interested in it, then teachers need to be able to adapt their learning, their teaching, so that they can learn around it. If there's a kid interested in reptiles and you're done with reptiles for the month and now you're moving on to mammals, The kid's not going to be interested in learning about mammals. He's interested in reptiles. Or if you've got a kid interested in computer programming, but okay, well, we're done with the computer programming segment of learning, so now we're going to move on to something else, physics. They're not going to be interested in physics. They're interested in computer programming. And so I think allowing kids to self-direct in a way with guidance, pick a topic that they're interested in and then tie the learning around that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really what's going to help things more.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah,
stick with what they're interested in as like the glue to keep them in their chair, basically, and then like pull the learning around that to keep them focused. That sounds great.
Yeah, I've seen in private schools a lot that they do have that self-directed learning, at least to some extent. Public schools don't necessarily. It seems that they're almost teaching to a very strict an agenda that's been set like for several years now, versus a private school literally has a much more fluid curriculum. So I don't know. I said the main question is the public education system broken? Will we be better served with either privatizing education or homeschooling?
I think for some kids, not all, the public education system is broken because it's designed to meet certain results. Teachers are told you need to teach to the test. Mm-hmm. That's coming up. There's standardized tests. I have friends who are public school teachers, and that's what they tell me. We have to teach them so that they get a certain score on this test so that we can get funding from the state and from the federal government to continue doing things in our school. So these teachers are really, they're strapped by the system right now because of the way that it works. And with homeschooling in particular, you want to talk about seeing people pinch pennies. A lot of people like myself and my wife, we don't have any way of getting funding for our education. We are the funding, right? So we find creative ways to teach our kids and to teach STEM topics.
What are some of the assumptions of homeschooling as a method? And I'm assuming you homeschool your kids. What are some of the obstacles you've run into, and would you recommend that for everyone?
I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. I think every family needs to assess whether or not it's something that they can do. Oftentimes it means that if you're a dual income family, you're probably going to be down to one income. Homeschooling is a lifestyle choice, more as much as it is an educational choice. And so you have to decide that, okay, I'm going to have to change things in my lifestyle that are going to allow me to educate my kids at home. My wife has a master's degree in teaching and mathematics. She taught in the public schools. And one of the primary reasons that we decided to homeschool was because we knew that we didn't feel like the education system could serve our kids the way that we could individually.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, some of my kids, with the way they behave, they would not, teachers would not want them in their classroom.
I can relate to that.
And they would be seen as a bad kid, right? Because they just have to move around and they have to do this and they have to do that. But no, you have to spend 50 minutes sitting down in a classroom. And that wouldn't work for some of my kids.
Right.
And so one of the things is people think that homeschool kids are bad as far as socialization, right? You always hear, what about socialization? Well, think about this. I went through the public schools and I spent 12 years in a classroom with people that were the same age as me. And as soon as I graduated high school or I started working, I was surrounded by people of all different ages. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things about homeschooling is they learn to interact with people older than them and younger than them long before most kids do. Because most kids in public school, they're spending all day with people the same age. Whereas if you're a homeschooled kid, you're spending all day with people of different ages. And so the socialization thing, I guess not so much, but early on it was thought, homeschool kids aren't socialized. You see that in general, one of the barriers is a lot of people think, well, I need a teaching degree to homeschool. You don't need that in any state in the U.S. And a lot of people think that you need a college degree to homeschool, and that just isn't the case. You can have other families help you with subjects that you don't understand, and you can learn what you need to teach your kids as well. But most importantly, one of the things that you'll find as your kids are kind of getting older and as you meet more homeschoolers is homeschool kids learn to teach themselves. And I think in today's society, given how fast everything moves and how fast everything changes, you have to learn how to learn. And if you don't learn how to learn, you're kind of stuck. And so homeschoolers tend to be a little bit more, I find it anyway, they tend to be a little bit more agile when it comes to learning new information because they've taught themselves, whether it's math or history or whatever the case may be. It's an adventure, that's for sure.
I'm actually considering homeschooling my 2 children. I'm looking at the online public school program right now. So it's more like my position would be more of from a coaching stance. Which I'm like, I guess I feel more safe doing that because I don't feel personally qualified to actually teach them what they need to know. But I like your point that you were saying as far as, I can, if it's a matter of understanding that it's a lifestyle choice and this is a commitment that I'm willing to make for my kids, then I end up putting myself in the position to learn what I need to learn for them. So what are your thoughts on homeschooling being subsidized and ending public education?
Oh boy, can of worms right there. I have been involved in homeschooling for 17 years now. So the idea of subsidies, I guess I don't really like that idea. And simply the reason being is because once you become beholden to someone for funds to do the homeschooling, then they can set what you need to learn. And one of the big things about the homeschooling movement is that you pretty much, as long as you're hitting the major subjects, so for example, in New York, you have to teach a science topic every 4 years, but you're not told what science you have to teach. You just have to teach science for 4 years. And once it starts being subsidized, the government's going to be able to say, well, okay, you need to do this now. Now you need to do that now. And given the current state of the education system the way it is now, I wouldn't want to see that transferred over to homeschooling because that's really what's happening right now is in order to qualify for a government subsidy, for a public school to qualify for a government subsidy, they have to meet certain terms. And that just, for me personally, it doesn't seem like it would work. I know that there are a lot of people who want homeschoolers to be able to participate in sports and things like that. And to me, it's funny when homeschoolers say our kids should be able to play sports, which is, funded by state money and state taxes and all those kinds of things. But we don't want the state to be able to tell us to do anything else in homeschooling. To me, it seems kind of like a double standard.
A little bit, yeah.
So if I were to make you Secretary of Education, right, and you have this epidemic of public schools that are very much below standard, at least the standard that we would hold schools to, how would you fix this system? Like, would you walk into schools one by one and say, this one's shut down and this one's shut down too, everybody go home and learn? Or would you change the standards and get rid of the standardized testing? Like, how would you fix the system?
Oh my goodness, I wouldn't even know where to start. I think part of the problem that we have with the education system is that, school districts are kind of built around where you live, right? And so if someone lives in a neighborhood that isn't well off financially, they have no choice but to go to the school that's in that area. They can't choose the public school that they want to go to. And so I think probably the first thing that I would do is I would offer people a choice of where to go and then go from there. So for example, if you live in, let's pick New York City, there's affluent neighborhoods in New York City and there's really poor neighborhoods in New York City. Now the problem is if you tell everyone, well, they can go wherever they want to. Now step 2 is, now you're dealing with a transportation issue, right? So how do the kids who live in the poor neighborhoods who we want to send to another school, how do we get them there? And then, it ends up turning into this really huge mess. And one of the things, I honestly don't think that the education system the way it is right now, I don't know that it's ever going to be fixed. I think we just need to offer people more alternatives and not make it so hard for parents to homeschool. But unfortunately, not everyone can homeschool. They're not in a financial situation where they can homeschool. If you're a young family and it takes both of your incomes to get the rent paid and to put food on the table, there's no money for homeschooling. Mm-hmm. Now, there are free resources out there for homeschooling. You could certainly do it super, super cheap, especially the first 2 or 3 years, because all you have to do is have a library card, and those are free. But once you start kind of getting up there, that's where you're running into the issues. And so I understand when people say, well, we should subsidize, and we should be able to subsidize homeschooling. And so I understand where that's coming from. But I honestly, the Secretary of Education, if I were Secretary of Education for one day, I don't know that I could fix it. Our public education system has been this way for 100 years, and it's probably going to take 100 years to fix it. You're not going to fix it in one day.
Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people are still in the mindset that that public education isn't broke, so let's not fix it.
Yeah, I think it was designed for a different time.
Yeah, different era. Yeah, definitely.
The standardized testing seemed to be a good idea in the moment, but I don't think it turned out so well. So one of the proposals by Republicans has been the voucher system, which I literally just came around on. So last question, and then I'll let you go. The voucher system where students have the opportunity to choose which school they attend. And of course, there are limits on how many students can attend specific schools, but you're given a voucher if you fall below a certain threshold in income where you can send your student to a different school outside of your district. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that that's a good idea? And do you think that maybe we should allow that voucher to be applied to homeschooling?
I guess one of the whole thought behind the voucher system is that we're designating a certain amount of money from the federal government for each kid anyway. So why don't we let schools compete for students?
Right.
And I know in New York City, there are some schools where there's like a waiting list, and parents, if they want their kid to go to a particular high school, they get on this waiting list when the kids are like in 3rd or 4th grade. Wow. In order to try and get their kids into these schools. And I think competition is great. I think if you have schools that are saying, look, we can do a better job of educating your kids and we want them here, we have better teachers, I think that's a great idea. But again, there's only a certain amount of capacity. So what happens to these kids who've been given a voucher and now they don't, the choice is almost taken away from them in some cases when it comes to vouchers. And whether or not to use it for homeschooling, I mean, I can see the merits of that, but again, I just don't like the idea of, if it was truly no strings attached, which I don't think that's ever the case with our government, if it were truly no strings attached, I would be for using vouchers for homeschooling. But again, you have parents that are going to fall into the situation where that voucher is not going to be enough for them to get them for them to be able to homeschool, and so they're kind of stuck in the same situation, especially in the inner city where there's just there's nowhere for them to go. And I mean, there's a long discussion about why things are that way that I don't think we want to get into on this podcast right now.
It's such an unfortunate circumstance that these schools have devolved into what they are now. Yeah. And I mean, maybe
or really just stayed stagnant.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. I do think it is important to say that there are schools out there, they're doing it right, which is why I say, homeschooling is not for everybody. as far as I know, the school district where I'm at, where my kids are, it's a great school district. Everyone tells me that their kids have great teachers. It's just not for us. And I had great teachers growing up. I'm sure you had great teachers growing up. Mm-hmm. And I think what we need is maybe instead of doing public school in a physical building, it's done virtually. It's done online. Like you said, you're looking into doing a homeschool program through the public school system. Mm-hmm. And that's a great alternative, I think, for some of these kids. So the voucher, instead of paying for them to go to another school, pays for the child to have the computer and the internet connection that they're going to need in order to go to that virtual school. I think that's a great middle ground. The problem is that they lose some of the interaction, but that can be made up in other ways, whether it's through rec sports or just hanging out with other kids that are in the same program on a weekly basis or something like that.
Yeah, homeschooling seems like the way to go. Every time I talk to someone about it,
it's such a tricky position, though. Like as he was saying, as everybody already knows, if you don't have the income for one of you to stay home with the kids to at least be there to coach them, it can't be done. Like, public school is the only option because you have to be at work while they're at school, and there's no way you can sacrifice one of those incomes in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Thanks for joining us for the PolyPsych podcast. This show's Anthony Lindsay
and Stephanie Marino.
Cheers. See you next time.